The governor's chamber was carved into black stone, its vaulted ceiling rising higher than any cathedral the soldier had ever seen. Columns of pale light burned along the walls, casting long shadows that seemed to kneel before the throne. She sat there, the alien-appointed governor, the one who ruled this colony with fear sharper than any blade. Her gown of silver threads shimmered like liquid moonlight, her posture regal, untouchable. The colonists bowed whenever she appeared, some in reverence, most in terror. She had never been denied, never been questioned. Until now, they drag him in chains across the polished floor, the iron clattering with each step. He was human, a soldier who had fought against their regime, blood still dried along his jaw. Two guards shoved him to his knees before her throne, but he did not lower his head. His eyes, dark, steady, unyielding, locked with hers, and in that moment something unexpected rippled through the silence. She felt it, sharp as a crack across glass. Hesitation. She leaned forward, studying him. "You stand before me in defeat," she said, her voice echoing cold through the chamber. "You will kneel, as all others do." But he didn't. He straightened, shoulders pulled back even under the weight of the chains. "I kneel to no one," he answered, calm but firm. His voice carried not rebellion's fury, but something deeper, steadier, dignity. Her advisors shifted uneasily along the walls. One step closer. "Governor, allow me to discipline him." She raised her hand, silencing them. Her gaze never left the soldiers. Something in him was unsettling, a mirror where she had expected submission. All her life and power had been built on obedience, fear, silence. Yet here was a man who would rather bleed than bow. "You defy me," she said almost softly. "No," he replied. "I defy the chains. You're only the one who holds the key." His words struck her harder than she admitted. Only the one who holds the key. It was truth, laid bare. She was not God, not destiny, only the enforcer of another's law. His unbroken stare peeled back the layers she wore like armor. For the first time in her reign, she felt the weight of her own throne pressing down on her, as though the stone seat itself was a prison. She looked around, saw the guards watching, the advisors waiting, the colonists beyond the chamber doors whispering of judgment. All expected her to shatter this man's defiance, to make him beg, to remind them all of who ruled. And yet her heart stuttered. "Leave us," she commanded suddenly. The chamber froze. "Governor," one guard asked carefully. "Leave now." Her tone brooked no argument. Slowly, the advisors and guards withdrew, the great doors groaning shut behind them. Silence settled, broken only by the faint hum of the light columns. She rose from her throne. The sound of her steps echoed as she descended, every click of her heels measured, deliberate. The soldier watched her, his chains rattling as he adjusted to face her fully. She stopped before him, close enough to see the stubborn lift of his chin, the blood at his temple, the defiance still burning in his gaze. "You should be afraid," she whispered. "I should," he agreed. "But I'm not." Her lips parted, breath caught. She searched his face for weakness, for fear, but found none. Instead, she found something stranger, something more dangerous. Conviction. A man who had nothing left to lose, and so could not be broken. Her fingers hovered near his face, almost brushing the bruise on his cheek. She stopped herself, curling her hand back into a fist. This was wrong. She was the governor, the iron voice of the empire. He was a prisoner, a defeated soldier. Yet with a single look, he had torn away the veil of her control. She stepped back quickly, as though distance might restore the balance. "You are nothing," she told him, but her voice lacked the perfect steadiness it once carried. He smiled faintly. "If I am nothing, then why do you tremble?" Her body went rigid. She wanted to strike him, silence him, prove to herself she was untouched. But her hand did not rise, because deep inside, she knew he was right. Her control had faltered. For the first time since she had sat upon that throne, she was no longer the one holding the gaze. She was the one caught inside it. Outside the chamber, the colony went about its day under the weight of alien banners. But within, the governor stood before a chained soldier, shaken by a truth she could not ignore. The empire had given her power. The throne had given her authority. Fear had given her obedience. But this man, he had given her something no one else dared: resistance. And resistance, she realized, was far stronger than obedience. Her rule had begun to crack, not by blade, not by revolt, but by the steady eyes of a man who refused to kneel. The chamber felt colder when she returned to it later that night, its great columns of light burning like silent judges. She had dismissed her council, sent the guards away, even forbade the scribes from recording. The throne room was empty, save for herself and him. They had locked him in irons at the base of the dais, shackled to the stone floor. But still he sat upright, his back unbent, his eyes burning with the same fire that had unsettled her hours earlier. She should not have come alone. Yet something had drawn her back. "You will kneel," she said again, her voice quieter this time, stripped of the grandeur she used before. "It is the law." His mouth curved into the faintest smirk. "Law," he said, rolling the word as if testing its weight. "Do you believe in it? Or do you only repeat it because they tell you to?" The question landed like a blade between her ribs. Her jaw tightened. "I enforce law. That is my role." "That is their role for you," he countered. "You wear their crown, sit on their throne, speak their decrees. But tell me, when was the last time you spoke with your own voice?" Her breath caught, though she masked it with a step forward. The chains clinked when he leaned toward her, his eyes locking with hers again. Always those eyes, steady and relentless, pulling at the cracks in her armor. "Do you know why they gave you power?" he pressed. "Because you were willing to wield it for them. You rule the people here, but who rules you?" The word struck harder than she admitted. She thought of the messages from orbit, the sealed orders delivered in coded tongues, the constant inspections from alien envoys who reminded her, gently but firmly, that her throne existed only so long as she pleased them. She had told herself it was worth it, that she held the colony together, that without her it would crumble. But his voice gnawed at that fragile justification, stripping it bare. "I rule because I must," she said, but it sounded more like a plea than a declaration. His smirk faded, replaced by something steadier. "No, you obey because you fear. There's a difference." Her throat tightened. The memory of her first day in this chamber rose unbidden. The moment the aliens crowned her governor, the colony kneeling, the thrill of power surging through her veins. But behind that thrill had always been the shadow of their presence, the unspoken truth that she was never more than a tool. She had buried that truth. He had just dug it up. She turned sharply, walking back toward the throne as if distance could restore her control. Her heels struck the stone in measured beats, her cloak sweeping behind her. She sat, high above him again, staring down, willing herself to feel untouchable. But his voice carried upward. "You can sit there all night, but you can't hide from the truth. Not from yourself, and not from me." Her hands gripped the arms of the throne, nails pressing into the silver inlay. She wanted to silence him, to remind him of the gulf between prisoner and governor. Yet the silence stretched, and when she finally spoke, it was not with the tone of command, but with something softer. "Why do you not fear me?" she asked. His gaze lifted, meeting hers with that same fire. "Because fear is how they keep us in chains, and I will not give them that victory. Not through you, not through anyone." The chamber pulsed with silence. She felt her heart stutter against her ribs, felt the weight of her crown, felt the invisible leash that tethered her to powers she had never truly defied. His eyes told her a truth she had long buried. She was as bound as he was, only her chains were gilded. "You think you can shake me," she whispered, though her voice lacked its usual conviction. "I don't need to shake you," he said. "I only need to remind you what you already know." Her breath trembled. She looked down at him, a prisoner in chains, bleeding and broken, yet more free in spirit than she had been in years. And in his defiance, she saw the reflection of something she had not dared consider in a long time. The possibility that her throne was not strength, but a cage. For the first time, she wondered not whether he would break, but whether she already had. The nights in the governor's quarters grew longer after that. She told herself she summoned him only to break him, to chip away at that defiance that clung to him like armor. She told herself she wanted answers, strategies, names of rebel cells. Yet when he stood before her, shackled and silent, his gaze steady as always, the words she had prepared dissolved on her tongue. She dismissed the guards. She said it was to loosen his tongue, that fear worked better in solitude. But in truth, their presence suffocated her. She wanted him to speak to her, not to the title she carried. Alone, the room shifted. The walls no longer echoed law. They whispered temptation. "You could end this," she told him one night, pacing in front of his chair. His wrists were bound to the iron rings set into the stone table. A faint scar marred his cheek from the last punishment. A single confession, and you could have rest, comfort, freedom. He tilted his head, the faintest trace of a smile tugging his lips. "Freedom you can give?" he asked quietly. The words dug into her skin like claws. "Yes," she said, too sharply. Then softer, "Yes, I can." "No," he murmured, his eyes locking with hers. "Not real freedom, only the illusion they let you hand out." Her breath hitched, and for a moment she wanted to strike him, to slap away that truth. Instead, she turned her back, letting her hands rest against the table's cold surface. His nearness radiated behind her like heat, though he never moved. The nights stretched, their conversations tangled. She found herself asking questions that had nothing to do with rebellion. His childhood, the places he had seen before the war, what he dreamed of when dreams were still safe to hold. He answered in fragments, not all at once, but enough. And in the spaces between his words, she found silence more intimate than command. It was on the fourth such night that her hand betrayed her. She reached across the table, as if to silence him when his voice cut too close. Her fingers brushed his knuckles, rough and calloused from labor, warm against her skin. She froze, but he did not pull away. "You don't know what you're doing," he said softly. "I am the governor," she whispered, as if that title still meant something. His gaze searched her face. "Then why do you tremble?" She had no answer, only the truth that her hand lingered longer than it should, that her pulse thundered in her throat. She told herself it was strategy, a new weapon, seduction as control. But when his eyes lowered to her lips, and hers to his, the excuse crumbled. The first kiss was stolen, quick, desperate, a mistake she swore she would never repeat. But she returned the next night, and the one after. Each time, her command weakened, her lies to herself thinner. She told herself she was conquering him with touch, bending his spirit where words had failed. Yet every shiver in her own body betrayed her. Every gasp that escaped her lips told her who was really unraveling. There were moments she pressed her forehead against his, chains clinking when he moved, her breath catching as his whispered words wrapped around her. "You think you hold me," he said once, his lips grazing her ear, "but you are the one bound now." She wanted to deny it. She wanted to summon guards, to lash him until he broke. But instead, she found herself clinging to him in the dark, desperate for the fire in his eyes that burned through the cold emptiness of her crown. Alone in her chamber, after their stolen nights, she would stare at her reflection in the tall, silvered glass. The crown sat heavy on her brow, yet she no longer recognized the woman beneath it. Her lips still tingled with his kiss, her skin still hummed from his touch. And the truth whispered louder each night. She was not using him. She was falling. And in falling, she was losing the only thing that had kept her alive this long: control. The whispers traveled faster than either of them imagined. A glance from a servant who lingered too long outside her door, the subtle narrowing of a guard's eyes, the way the alien overseer seemed suddenly too curious about her nightly routines. All of it was smoke before the fire. It began with him, dragged from his quarters at dawn, his wrists bound in iron heavier than before. He was taken to the underground chambers where the aliens themselves conducted their punishments. She was not informed. She was not invited. She only knew something was wrong when she entered her hall and saw his absence, the chair where he always sat, empty. Her demands for answers were met with silence. The alien guards, towering and sharp-eyed, shifted like statues. Only later, when the air seemed to shiver with the faint echoes of screams muffled by stone, did she realize what was being done to him. She went to them, cloaked in her authority. "He is mine," she said, her voice carrying through the chamber doors. "Any punishment he suffers, I decree." But the aliens laughed, not loudly, not mockingly, but with the cold dismissal of masters who had no need to justify themselves to a pawn. One leaned close enough that she caught the metallic tang of his breath. "You forget, Governor," it said, its voice a hiss that scraped against her ears. "Nothing here belongs to you. Not him, not this colony, not even your own crown." The word struck harder than any blow. She wanted to argue, to raise her voice, to remind them she had ruled here for years, kept order, delivered obedience. But in that moment, she saw it clearly. Every order she had given, every judgment she had passed, was only ever an echo of theirs. She had not been a queen. She had been a mouthpiece. The crown they had given her had never been freedom. It had been a chain, polished and gilded, placed upon her head to make her believe she was above the others. When she was dragged into the chamber at last, the sight froze her blood. He hung from chains bolted to the wall, his body marked with lashes that cut deep into his flesh, burns glowing faintly from alien rods pressed to his skin. His face was swollen, blood trailing from his lip, but his eyes, those eyes, lifted when she entered. Unbroken, she staggered forward, but the guards barred her with their spears. "Stop," she cried. "This is not justice. This is cruelty." The overseer turned to her, a smirk twisting its narrow face. "You speak of justice as if the word belongs to you. Your place is not to question. Your place is to serve." And then, in front of her, they tore the crown from her head. Its weight left her skull bare, her hair tumbling loose. The circle of gold clattered to the ground, rolling until it stopped at the base of his feet. In that hollow, ringing silence, she felt stripped of everything, not just the symbol, but the illusion it had carried. She was no ruler. She had never been one. The title, the throne, the guards, even the robes she wore, they had all been threads of the same leash. Her knees nearly buckled, but she caught herself. She forced her gaze away from the aliens, away from their smirks, and fixed it on him. He was battered, nearly broken, yet his stare burned in her like a torch in the dark. And in it, she saw something she had never seen before. Pity. Not for himself. For her. "You see now," he rasped through split lips, his voice rough but steady. "You were chained too." Her breath shuddered, and tears stung the corners of her eyes. She tried to speak, to apologize, to tell him she hadn't known, but the words tangled on her tongue. Because deep down, some part of her had known. She had felt it in every order she gave that was not truly hers, in every command she delivered under the shadow of their watching eyes. The overseers ordered her removed then, declaring she had grown too soft, too compromised to lead. She was dragged from the chamber like any other prisoner, her wrists bound, the crown left behind like discarded jewelry. As she stumbled into the cold corridors of the alien fortress, stripped of her title, her dignity, her mask, one truth rang louder than all the rest. She had never been in control. Not of him. Not of them. Not even of herself. Her chains had only been prettier than the others. And now they were broken. But in the breaking, she was left with nothing. Nothing but the image of him hanging there, still unbowed, still alive, and the fire in his eyes that told her her own survival might yet depend on him. The night they escaped was drenched in smoke and fire. The colony walls, once towering with authority, seemed to crumble behind them as they ran. The alien guards had been summoned elsewhere, distracted by uprisings flaring like sparks across the districts. And in that chaos, she and the man who had once been her slave slipped into the ruins. Her robe, once silk and fine cloth, now hung in tatters. Her knees were scraped raw from the stones, her breath ragged from the pace, but she kept moving because he was beside her. His hand gripped hers with a strength she had not felt since before the crown. Not a command, not an order, but a lifeline. When at last they stumbled into the broken skeleton of an abandoned temple, they collapsed in the shadows. The roof was shattered, letting the stars look down like silent witnesses. Rubble surrounded them, and the air carried the ghost scent of incense long burned away. Here, no alien eyes pierced. Here, no crown weighed heavy. She leaned back against the stone, trembling. Her face, streaked with dirt and blood, turned toward him as he crouched in front of her. He was hurt too, burns still raw, lashes cutting into his flesh, bruises blooming across his chest. But even so, he moved with careful precision, tearing cloth from his own shirt to bind her wounds. "Stop," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You're the one who needs healing." He glanced at her, steady, unflinching. "I've endured worse." His hands didn't stop. He tightened the bandage around her arm, wiped dirt from the cut at her temple. Every touch was gentle, deliberate. Not the touch of a slave, not the touch of a servant. Her throat tightened. She had commanded armies, ordered executions, watched prisoners kneel at her feet without so much as a flicker of pity. Yet here, in these ruins, she could not meet his gaze without feeling small. Not because he made her small, but because she was shedding the last of the armor she had worn for so long. "I was never free," she murmured, her voice shaking. "All those years, I thought I was above them. I thought the chains were theirs and not mine. But it was me too. Every order I gave was their order. Every law I enforced was theirs. I wore the crown, but it was only another shackle." He paused, the cloth in his hands stained with her blood. Slowly, he lifted his eyes to hers. "And me?" he asked quietly. "What was I?" Her lips parted, but no words came at first. Shame pressed down on her chest, heavier than the alien crown ever had. She remembered the day he had been brought to her, forced to kneel before her throne. She had looked at him like property. She had told herself it was survival, that to keep her place, she had to act untouchable, that she could not see him as a man, only as a symbol. "I never wanted to own you," she confessed at last, her voice breaking like glass. "Not once. I told myself it was power. I told myself I had to be cold, to be cruel. But it wasn't you I wanted kneeling. It wasn't obedience I wanted. She swallowed hard, tears sliding down her cheeks. "I wanted you to look at me, to see me. Not the crown, not the chains, just me." The silence between them was heavy, thick with the weight of truths long buried. And then, slowly he reached out. His rough hand, scarred and trembling, touched her cheek. She flinched, not because of fear, but because of the tenderness. He tilted her face until her eyes met his. "I see you," he said simply. Her breath hitched. Those 3 words broke her more than the crown's loss, more than the alien's laughter, more than the sight of his bloodied body hanging in chains. She felt the weight of years lift, leaving her bare. For the first time since she had been raised to her throne, she felt human. Not governor, not ruler, not puppet, just a woman. Her hand rose to cover his, pressing it against her cheek as tears fell freely now. "And what do you see?" she whispered. He leaned closer, his forehead nearly brushing hers. "A woman who chose fire over chains. A woman who still has a soul. Not mistress, not master. Just you." Something inside her cracked, wide open. Without thinking, she leaned forward, her lips finding his. It was not a kiss of command or control. It was desperate, trembling raw. His arms came around her, strong and steady, pulling her into him as if he had been waiting all along. The ruins around them faded. The stars above burned brighter. For that moment, there was no empire, no aliens, no chains. Only 2 souls who had been broken in different ways, finding each other in the ashes. When they pulled apart, she rested her head against his chest, listening to the rhythm of his heart. It was uneven, scarred by pain, but it was alive, strong, human. And for the first time in all her years as governor, she allowed herself to whisper words she had never spoken aloud. "Don't leave me." His arms tightened around her, his voice low but steady. "I won't. Not now. Not ever." In the ruins of the old world, where the ashes of temples and crowns lay scattered, 2 figures clung to each other. She, who had once held the chains. He, who had once been bound by them. And in their embrace, The first embers of something new, something stronger than command or rebellion, began to burn. The ruins became their hiding place, but the ruins could not hide the truth of what had been done to him. Nights were restless. Sometimes, as he slept, his skin glowed faintly in the dark, veins pulsing with an otherworldly light like molten fire trying to break free. At first she thought it was the reflection of burning lamps, but then she realized it came from within him. When the pain came, it was violent. His back arched, his body trembled as if tearing itself apart. The glow flared, crackling in the air, making the stones shiver and the ground hum beneath them. She rushed to him every time, pressing her hands against his chest, whispering his name, holding him as if her weight alone could keep him tethered to the world. He would gasp, sweat pouring, teeth clenched, and whisper, "They put it inside me. They wanted a weapon. Not a man. A weapon." Her heart clenched each time. She had seen the alien experiments, had walked past cages where humans were tested, broken, infused with strange energies that twisted them until nothing remained of their souls. And now, looking at him, she feared they had nearly succeeded, but the fire in his eyes told her he was still here, still human. "Listen to me," she would whisper, cradling his face in her hands as the glow raged through his body. "You are not theirs. You are not what they try to make you. You are mine." And somehow, the words seemed to steady him. The glow dimmed, the shivers eased, his breath slowed until he lay still again, his head against her chest, the dangerous fire inside him quieted. She knew then that her touch mattered. Not her crown, not her authority, but her love. It anchored him, and the more she gave it, the steadier he became. In the days that followed, he learned to bend the fire. Not perfectly, not safely, but when raiding alien patrols searched the ruins and cornered them, he let it out. The air shimmered around him, light cracking from his body like lightning. The soldiers screamed as their weapons melted in their hands, their armor buckling under invisible heat. The ground itself split. He stood in the center, chest heaving, eyes burning like twin stars. She ran to him after, afraid of what he might have become. But when he turned to her, the fire dimmed. His arms reached out for her, not for war, not for blood, but for her. And she went to him without hesitation. That night, when they collapsed together in the shadows of the broken city, he whispered, "If not for you, I would burn myself alive." She pressed her lips to his, fierce and desperate. "Then take me with you. If you burn, I burn. If you rise, I rise." Their intimacy grew from those words, from that vow. In his arms, she felt the fire seep in her too, not as pain, but as passion. Every kiss stoked it, every touch steadied it. Where once their bond had been chains, now it was rebellion itself, something no alien could touch, something no empire could crush. The whispers of them spread in the dark corners of the colony, of the governor who betrayed her crown, of the slave who burned with alien fire, of their love, dangerous and defiant, fueling something greater than survival. People who had once bowed their heads now raised them, whispering of rebellion. And when they spoke of it, it was not banners or swords they imagined, but the image of two lovers standing together, fire and flesh bound as one. He had been their weapon, but she had made him human again, and, together, they would turn his fire into the spark that could ignite an uprising. The colony had long lived under the shadow of alien towers, their spires piercing the sky like spears of authority. Every street, every home, every whisper was monitored, recorded, crushed. And at the heart of it once sat the governor, their enforcer, their symbol of power, their untouchable master. But now, she stood not above the people, not cloaked in robes of command, but shoulder to shoulder with the very man she had once called prisoner. The sight of them together, her hand gripping his fire burning behind his gaze, spread across the colony like a storm breaking free from chains. The broadcast wasn't planned. It was survival. When the aliens descended to crush their attempted escape, the soldier fought back with the unstable energy that burned through his veins. The fire they once tried to suppress had become his weapon, wild arcs of light tearing through armored soldiers. She didn't hide in fear or command from afar. She was at his side, her voice carrying through the hacked transmitters, shouting words that stirred hearts long buried under obedience. The colonists watched as the once governor, their executioner, turned her blade against the empire that owned her. And in her rebellion, they found permission to rebel too. The first tower fell that night, a structure of surveillance collapsing under explosives smuggled by colonists who no longer cared about consequences. As the dust rose, people lifted stolen banners high, not alien sigils, but rough cloth painted in ash and blood with words of defiance. Children, elders, workers, and soldiers, they poured into the streets, faces lit by fires both real and symbolic. Fear cracked, and in its place came something more dangerous: hope. The aliens fought back with precision, their warships descending, their metallic voices demanding obedience. But obedience had already died. The colony was alive with fire, and its heart beat in rhythm with two figures at the center: the soldier whose body burned with unstable power, and the woman who had once been the Empire's voice. Her face was familiar to all, once seen on screens ordering punishments, now seen defying her masters. The people couldn't look away. She wasn't commanding them, she was fighting beside them. And that, more than orders, lit the uprising ablaze. But victory wasn't certain. The soldier's power flared dangerously, each burst a reminder that the fire inside him could consume not only the enemy, but everything around him. There were moments when his scream shook the ground, when the heat of his rage scorched too close to the ones they fought for. And in those moments, it was her hand that pulled him back, her voice that steadied him, her love that turned destruction into precision. Together, they became something more than human, more than rebellion. They became a symbol of unity in a fractured world. Whispers spread like wildfire. The governor had fallen in love with her slave, and through that love, she had become human again. To some, it was betrayal. To others, salvation. But no one could deny what they saw with their own eyes. Alien warships falling in flames, towers crumbling into rubble, and two figures standing together in defiance of an empire. When the alien reinforcements landed, they expected submission. They expected broken colonists crawling back in chains. Instead, they met fire. They met rebellion. They met a people who no longer believed in the myth of alien invincibility. And at the front of it all were the two who had once been enemies, now bound tighter than law, tighter than fear. Their kiss, broadcast in the middle of battle, was not just intimacy. It was defiance made flesh. Control was shattered, not just the Empire's control, but hers as well. She was no longer the untouchable governor. She was a woman who had chosen love over power, humanity over authority. And in doing so, she had given the colony its freedom. The banners rose higher, the chants shook the air, and the aliens, for the first time, retreated. But as the people celebrated, as flames painted the night with victory's glow, she looked at him and saw the flicker of something darker. His body trembled, his fire unstable, his veins glowing faintly like molten cracks in stone. She tightened her grip on his hand, fear mixing with love. They had won tonight, yes, but the fire inside him was growing, and she knew it was only a matter of time before the Empire, or his own body, demanded its price. And still, she didn't let go. The world saw them as symbols, as leaders, as the spark of revolution. But beneath the banners, beneath the fire, there were only two hearts clinging to each other, daring to love in the ruins of control. The colony was free, but the war was far from over. The uprising had ended, though the scars of war were etched into every street, every broken tower, every body carried out from the rubble. The alien warships were gone, driven back by fire and fury, by the people's long-buried defiance, and by the bond between two unlikely souls who had dared to stand against an empire. The colony, for the first time in memory, breathed without chains tightening around its lungs. And in that breathless silence after the storm, the world seemed to wait for what came next. She stood before him, The woman who had once been a governor, once a mouthpiece of alien law, once a feared mistress. Her robes of authority had long been torn away, replaced by the dirt and blood of battle. And yet, she had never looked more powerful. Not because she ruled, but because she chose not to. Slowly, deliberately, she lowered herself to her knees before him. Not in submission, but in surrender of pride. Her voice was quiet, carried only to him even as thousands watched. Not as ruler, not as master, as a woman. I ask only for your love. The world seemed to hold its breath. He looked down at her, chains of memory flashing in his mind. The day he had been dragged before her throne, the iron weight on his wrists, the fire in his chest held back only by sheer will. He remembered her gaze then, cold and untouchable, a governor's mask unbroken. And he remembered the cracks, the nights when that mask had slipped, when loneliness had betrayed her, when touch had betrayed them both. He remembered her confession in the ruins, the way she had admitted she never wanted to own him, only to be seen. And he saw her now, kneeling not as a symbol, not as a ruler, but as a woman stripped of all control, asking not for obedience, but for love. Slowly, he reached down and took her hands, pulling her to her feet. His voice, steady and fierce, carried across the square. No chains. Not yours, not mine. Only us. The crowd erupted, their voices rising not in chants of rebellion, but in cries of something deeper. Devotion. Unity. The image of them, once enemies, once master and captive, now bound only by love, burned across every broadcast, every hacked transmission, every whisper that carried beyond the colony. It spread from world to world, from ship to ship, from oppressed to oppressed. The story of a governor and her slave, of power turned into love, of control shattered by devotion, became legend. Alien law could dictate obedience. Alien weapons could crush bodies. But what spread now could not be stopped. A story that whispered to every chained soul that freedom was possible, that love could survive in the darkest shadows of empire. She leaned into him, forehead to forehead, their breaths trembling but unbroken. Around them, the colony rose from ashes, banners waving not for war, but for rebirth. And somewhere, far beyond their ruined skies, the story carried on. No longer mistress and slave, no longer governor and captive, but two hearts that defied control, whose devotion became stronger than law, stronger than empire, stronger than fear. Their names would be remembered. Their love would be carried in secret songs, in murals painted on broken walls, in coded transmissions whispered across the stars. Not control, never control, but devotion, devotion that had turned rebellion into legend. And as he held her close, as the crowd's roar echoed through the night, he knew that this was not the end of their story. It was only the beginning of something greater.